who say, well, they don't have a soul. Well, I run into human beings that I began to wonder whether they had a soul. But
okay,
there are two types of grays from what I've learned. Mm-hmm. There are the little guys who would appear to be laboratory products. And then there are the 6-foot grays, whose eyes are more round. And they're not really gray, they're just sort of a chalky off-white color. Mm-hmm. And they seem to be an evolved race all of their own. And I think those are the ones that probably ran into Betty Hill and Barney at the incident many years ago.
Have you heard about Dan Burish talking about the Orions that are sitting in ships along with the military, actually watching the planet right now?
I've heard bits and pieces of that. I don't know too much about Dan's story. He's come up with a great many things.
Okay, but this is just new information that he's actually come forward with.
Well,
and they're watching the planet to see what happens and whether or not we have a catastrophe of any kind, and whether they might have to step in.
We have photographs, and many of them I'm going to share and show. I have slides, photographs of gigantic objects. I'm talking about humongous objects in space. And many of them are in satellites around their orbit around the planet. Many of them are in orbits around the moon, around Mars. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to share that I got from a Soviet cosmonaut on what happened with the Phobos thing. The Russians, you know, their famous Phobos rocket system that they sent up there some years back, which got knocked out of orbit by an anomalous object that came up from the surface. But it had taken a number of outstanding photographs before it was damaged and crashed.
Okay, what will you called it an anomalous, I don't know, object that came up from the surface, meaning the surface of the
Mars.
moon?
From
Mars. Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Phobos program was sent to Mars because they had hoped to land a lander on the satellite Phobos.
Right.
There are two circling Mars, which are anomalous. Again, that fantastic word, anomalous. Astronomers consider them anomalous because, first of all, they're going in the wrong direction for a natural satellite, whatever that means. They're too small to be natural satellites, and they're too close to the surface of Mars to have survived. Because if they were natural, they would long ago have been brought down and sucked in by gravity and crashed. The fact that they're still there puzzles everybody. So the Russians said, we're going to land on Phobos. It's about 12 miles in diameter. I think Deimos is only about 6 or 7. And they were going to take some pictures on the surface. Well, you know, apparently the intelligences up there decided, no, you're not going to do that, and bumped Phobos, the satellite that the Soviets sent up, knocked it out of orbit, and it crashed, apparently.
But they've been doing that to the JPL craft going up and around Mars for
years
now.
There is an intelligence on Mars that wants to limit our access to their reality. And they've done a damn pretty good job of it.
Well, our witness, Henry Deacon, and I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know him well.
Okay. He has said that the Anunnaki are on Mars in bases.
I agree with that.
So are they the ones shooting down those objects, you know, the various
probably.
Craft from JPL and so on?
Look, Zechariah has said, and I know this old man, I respect him tremendously. He says they never left. They withdrew overtly from their activities on the planet with us, but their activities have continued covertly, both on Earth, the Moon, and Mars. And from the knowledge I have and the limited amount of information I've been able to get, that the primary focus, the primary intelligence behind all of this are the Anunnaki. The same group that genetically engineered us so many thousands of years ago.
Okay, but you've got Enki and Enlil, right? And these are warring brothers, and one is working for the positive side of humanity.
Well,
and
you
the
had
other...
this dysfunctional family. They even went to war with each other. And man was in the middle, as he always has been. You know, we were a product of their engineering. They engineered us as a slave species. They engineered us to work for them.
But aren't they still at war?
Apparently there is still, and some of our remote viewers, and I know a few of them, I've done a little of it myself. And believe me, it works.
Mm-hmm.
I've been accused of being guilty of front-loading, so to speak, because when I want to look at something, I know what I want to look at. The military originally trained their guys to not know what they were looking for, and then they would download, you know, compare and such.
Right.
But when I want to look at something, I know exactly what I want to look at. One of the greatest, of course, is Ingo Swann.
Oh, absolutely.
A tremendous guy. What an intellect that guy
Oh,
is.
Incredible. We're dying to interview him. Do you know?
Well, he and I have corresponded. I wrote a nice article about him one time, years ago.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote me a letter and thanked me for it and told me he appreciated
Lovely.
it a lot.
Yes.
But he is a rare man. He's a rare intellect.
Yes.
Not only is he probably the best remote viewer we've ever had, perhaps other than Pat Price,
Right.
that Ingo's come up with stuff on the moon. That you have to read his book,
Actually, I have.
Penetration.
Yes.
It's dynamite.
And it's hard to get a hold of. I
Yeah,
understand.
it should be reissued because it'd sell like hotcakes.
Absolutely.
I spoke about it on Coast to Coast a couple of times with Art Bell, and apparently it became so damn hot that you can't find a copy, and $200 or $300 each if you can find one.
Yeah. Well, I have. I don't know if I still have it, but I had one.
Yeah. Well, hold on to it. It's gold.
Uh-huh.
But Ingo is gold himself.
Okay, but let's kind of like move back to the question, because I want to get sort of drill down to this answer. So they're still at war.
They still have a difference of opinion about us. Now, whether Enlil and Enki, he goes by two names,
Okay.
whether they still are alive or not,
Right.
with the genetic geniuses that they have been, that they are, they can genetically manipulate, they ingeniously genetically manipulated their own chromosomes, DNA, till they literally have become practically immortal. Now, I wouldn't be a bit surprised that Enki and Enlil may still be alive. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're running around with a cane like I do, and grunting and groaning. They got the great grandkids doing the running, and I don't know that, and I'm sure that no one else does. But apparently, the factions are still divided, and the one side wants to use us, as they always did, and the other side wants to give us the opportunity to be our own species, to chart our own future, and to determine our own lives. Mm-hmm. And there apparently has been difference of opinion going on. So
when we get back to the national security state and the state of the U.S. right here and now, I mean, you're an ex-military. I hardly want to call you ex, because I think you're in some ways probably still consulted here and there. We're about to go to war with Iran. What's your perspective on this? We're not?
No, we're not.
Okay.
And that's my opinion. Mm-hmm. For whatever it's worth,
Sure.
I have a half penny in my pocket that I don't believe that we're going to have a nuclear war, because I don't think the custodians will allow it. Right. The planet is too valuable. It's too rich a reservoir of life. Not only the humans here on this planet, but all the other creatures. This planet is an absolute cornucopia of beautiful, beautiful forms of life. And not only that, but the, what is it, the fauna and the, what's the other term?
Flora.
The flora.
Uh-huh.
The flora is infinite almost.
Yeah.
No, the planet's too valuable.
Okay.
They've got a lot invested in planet Earth, and they're not about to let it go to a nuclear war because they have the power to see that it does not happen. And I want to tell you something else. You've heard this old rumor about the Prime Directive? Mm-hmm. Bullshit. It doesn't exist.
Right. Okay.
They have been interfering here, breaking the so-called Prime Directive over the centuries, so thousands of times. They have been interfering, according to our historical records, back to ancient Greece. They probably had a hand in that damn dust-up at Troy. Mm-hmm. You know, they took sides. There were even rumors in Homer's reports that the gods themselves came down and took sides and played in the game. To them, it's a game.
Right. Well, the Bhagavad Gita, if you're
There
familiar
you are.
with it,
It's
I mean,
filled
we
with
go
it.
in.
The Vedas are filled with it, you see.
Absolutely.
Richard Thompson is a genius. He's written a book about it.
Ah.
Alien Identities, it's called.
Okay, I'll
Get
take a
it,
look.
read it if you get a
Yes,
chance.
I'd love
Richard
to.
Thompson.
Okay, now I'm going to change gears.
He worked with Cremo on the.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were jointly wrote that book on the hidden history of the human race.
Oh, okay.
Cremo and Thompson wrote that. Well, Richard wrote a book of his own called Alien Identities, and it's filled with Vedic facts, which you would enjoy.
Yes.
But the history's pretty clear. They've intervened over the centuries, again and again and again, wherever it seemed appropriate to their benefit on their behalf. And they've gotten in our wars. They've messed around in that whole mess.
Okay, but what about Planet X?
Oh, it's a reality.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So what are they going to do about that?
Well, apparently they are concerned about, you know the story, according to Sitchin and according to the Sumerians, it's a reality. Mm-hmm. Well, our astronomers apparently have concluded that it is indeed a reality. For almost a century, astronomers have been concerned and interested about what they called an intruder that seems to come and go from time to time, and they can measure it by the perturbations and the effects on other planets. They've known its existence for a long time, but they've never gone public about it. Well, in the early 80s, the JPL, the guys at
Jet Propulsion Lab.
Used to call it Jack Parsons Laboratory.
Yes.
Which I think is probably where the original JPL came from.
Yes.
Because Jack Parsons established it. Anyhow, they sent out a couple of Pioneers satellites back in '82 just to try to determine if there was some truth to it. Mm-hmm. And the Pioneers apparently came back with data which said not only yes, but hell yes. And the Pioneers concluded, the Pioneer satellite data concluded. So, wow, astronomers were troubled by that. Whew. Could this thing be real? And well, what did they do? They sent out what they called an infrared astronomical satellite. I think they called it IRAS anyhow, and this was done in '83. They sent the IRAS out, taking infrared pictures all around the ecliptic, above and below. And apparently IRAS got 2 giant positive responses that yes, the 12th planet, the 10th planet, however you want to call it, yes, it's real. And that's when the lid slammed down.
So it's out there, it's on its way back in, right?
According to the Sumerians and Sitchin, apparently it is. And if you're a student of history, as one of my majors, its last pass was 1600 BC. The Sumerians and Sitchin and all of those say it has an orbit of 3,600 years.
Mm-hmm.
So as like many of us, you know, I count on my fingers and toes and figure out, well, 1600 BC, it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Wow, it's due. Well, apparently it is.
So
Now,
why are they keeping this a secret?
Because
you're an expert on secrets.
Listen, every time Nibiru would make a pass, it was not always devastating. It would depend on whether the planet Earth and Nibiru were on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if we were on the same side of the sun at the same time, all hell would break loose on planet Earth. Well, apparently, the last pass triggered the explosion of Santorini, Thera, the volcano in the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea, blew its top, brought to a close the great Minoan civilization. Among other things, it affected Egypt. It's all in the records, apparently. There are even historians and theologians who say that Santorini's explosion is exactly what you're reading about when the plagues and all hit Egypt that allowed Moses to get the Israelites out. But if you look at 1600 BC and figuring that was a relatively recent past, it's due now, and apparently the guys in the astronomical observatories know it. And that, again, is above top secret. Let me give you a tiny example. For a number of years ago, there were two brilliant guys working at the Naval Observatory in Washington. Tom Van Flandern is one, who I hope you've interviewed.
No, but yeah, please continue, and we'd love to do that.
He's no longer with the Naval Observatory. The other one was a chief astronomer at the observatory, a brilliant man by the name of Robert Harrington.
Right.
And Harrington gave an interview to Zecharia Sitchin a number of years ago. I think it was 91 or so. Mm-hmm. Where he came right out and said, Dr. Sitchin, we are interested in this because it ties in perfectly with the work you've done on the Sumerians and the ancient planet Nibiru. He said, we found it, it's real, we have photographs of it, and he says from what we can put together, it's a rather nice planet. It's about 2.5 times the size of the Earth. Apparently it's heading toward the system, the center of the system. We've concluded about everything about it except that we haven't named it. And Zecharia spoke up and he says, it's already been named. He says, you simply call it Nibiru, as the Sumerians called it, the planet of the crossing. Mm-hmm. Well, Mrs. Sitchin and I were in agreement. I miss her. She died about a year ago. Mm. She was convinced that Robert Harrington had died because somebody bumped him off, because he had the courage to come out and give Zecharia this interview. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It's on tape.
No, I haven't seen it, but we interviewed Lucas Scantamburlo about this subject, and he's also talked about Robert Harrington.
Yeah, well, Harrington gave the interview to Zecharia, and it's on a video called Are We Alone? And I think you can pick it up at the conference here next week.
Okay.
I have a copy, and I sent a copy to Neil Freer, who's a man you should interview.
Okay, well, we're in touch with Neil. He's a very interesting guy.
Oh, he's brilliant.
He's a brilliant guy.
He's brilliant. He just recently came out and admitted that he's had an intimate interrelationship with extraterrestrial intelligence since he was a child.
Well, he's always talking about the Anunnaki. I do know this.
Well, he wrote a book called Breaking the God Spell. Mm-hmm. And he has supported Zechariah's work for years.
I have a question, Bob, if I may, about the provenance of this information, in the sense that Zecharia Sitchin's work is very well documented, and a lot of people watching this video will be very familiar with with his books and with all the intelligent commentary about that, are you saying that you have additional information based on your contacts within the Old Boys Network? Or are you doing a neat presentation of...
Many of my conclusions are my own, you know, and they, in many respects, correlate perfectly with Sitchin's work, which is, you know, Neil has told me, he says, you know, Zechariah really should get the Nobel Prize. But I don't know what they would grant it to him in what field. But he's such an outstanding scholar in what he's done, and the Earth Chronicles is what he calls all of his work. Well, I think there's 7 or 8 of them now.
I have 2 questions. One's a minor one to do with celestial mechanics. And it's just something that I've never understood, and I've heard this question from many other people as well. That if Nibiru comes from the outer reaches of the solar system, it's going to be an icy rock, which isn't going to be the kind of place that any beings could live on or would want to live on. And researcher Andy Lloyd, who you probably have heard about, has theorized that what they're seeing in the photographs that you referred to as an orange object is actually a brown dwarf, with the possibility of Nibiru being one of its moons, if you like. And there's a lot of debate about how to apply what Sitchin seems to have been saying to the real practicalities of life on an icy rock out in the orbit of Pluto. And I wondered if you knew or had anything to say about that.
No, it's not an icy rock. And yes, when it makes its long journey out and back, it gets so far away from the sun that the sun is probably no more than a little tiny prick of light, a little tiny pinpoint. And if you would think that it would be naturally icy cold. No, apparently the planet, like many planets in the system here, generate its own heat. It has in its core a generating heat system very much like our own. We have a system within the core of this planet that has been described as a thermonuclear reaction, very similar to the sun. Now, most of the life and all of the bounty and all of the beauty of life on this planet comes from our going around this beautiful sun. But I don't think Nibiru is an icy rock. No, I think, first of all, that it probably generates enough of its own heat, and I think they probably did indeed create for themselves, with the advanced technology that they have, a kind of a Dyson sphere. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. You know what brilliant British astronomer, I think, Freeman Dyson, said some years ago, that an incredibly advanced technology will have the ability to enclose its planet and retain not only its heat, but its atmosphere. And I suspect that the Anunnaki have done that to Nibiru, and they probably did it, good enough, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million years ago. So the planet, I think the color from it, the dull red golden color, is a result of that envelope of gold shell that they've created. They've created for themselves a Dyson sphere around their planet. And I suspect that any advanced technology will ultimately do the same, simply because it makes sense. It's a practical thing.
But if they had that degree of engineering capability, why wouldn't they just live on Mars instead of hurtling through the solar system?
Well, they weren't the original occupants of Mars.
Okay.
They used Mars as a way station, and they've reactivated it, and I agree with Zechariah on that they've reactivated their way system, their way station there. They used to drop off on Mars on their way here. So they were never, I don't think, original inhabitants of Mars. There are a few remnants of original inhabitants on Mars, There's even some indications, which I've been looking into, and I've gotten some data, that we're playing host to a bunch of Martians here on this planet. I'm talking about the original species.
Do you know anything about the original Martian species? Or have you...
Other than the only thing, I've talked to a couple of remote viewers who've apparently been able to come face to face with them, so to speak, and they ended up looking a lot like American Indians.
Okay.
And I may have met a Martian, but I've known so many strange people in my life.
And sure, I mean, I understand this well enough to know not to laugh at a comment like that, that's for sure. So, that, believe it or not, was meant to be a minor question. I have a more major one, something that I thought you might want to talk about, or maybe I had misunderstood you a little earlier on, I think, in a conversation that Kerry had reported with you. Some serious researchers, Linda Howe, Jim Mars, quite a lot of other people, are really suspecting that there may be a hoax alien invasion as a kind of major celestial 9/11 event in our skies.
You're talking about a false flag kind of situation.
Flag, yes. And
if we were to pull that off, if any of our idiot nitwits back there think that they could pull that off, I think they'd make absolute damn fools of the people who say, well, they don't have a soul. Well, I run into human beings that I began to wonder whether they had a soul. But
okay,
there are two types of grays from what I've learned. There are the little guys who would appear to be laboratory products. And then there are the 6-foot grays, whose eyes are more round. And they're not really gray, they're just sort of a chalky off-white color. And they seem to be an evolved race all of their own. And I think those are the ones that probably ran into Betty Hill and Barney at the incident many years ago.
Have you heard about Dan Burish talking about the Orions that are sitting in ships along with the military, actually watching the planet right now?
I've heard bits and pieces of that. I don't know too much about Dan's story. He's come up with a great many things.
Okay, but this is just new information that he's actually come forward with.
Well,
and they're watching the planet to see what happens and whether or not we have a catastrophe of any kind, and whether they might have to step in.
We have photographs, and many of them I'm going to share and show. I have slides, photographs of gigantic objects. I'm talking about humongous objects in space. And many of them are in satellites around their orbit around the planet. Many of them are in orbits around the moon, around Mars. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to share that I got from a Soviet cosmonaut on what happened with the Phobos thing. The Russians, you know, their famous Phobos rocket system that they sent up there some years back, which got knocked out of orbit by an anomalous object that came up from the surface. But it had taken a number of outstanding photographs before it was damaged and crashed.
Okay, what will you called it an anomalous, I don't know, object that came up from the surface, meaning the surface of the
Mars.
moon?
From
our Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Phobos program was sent to Mars because they had hoped to land a lander on the satellite Phobos. There are two circling Mars, which are anomalous. Again, that fantastic word, anomalous. Astronomers consider them anomalous because, first of all, they're going in the wrong direction for a natural satellite, whatever that means. They're too small to be natural satellites, and they're too close to the surface of Mars to have survived. Because if they were natural, they would long ago have been brought down and sucked in by gravity and crashed. The fact that they're still there puzzles everybody. So the Russians said, we're going to land on Phobos. It's about 12 miles in diameter. I think Deimos is only about 6 or 7. And they were going to take some pictures on the surface. Well, you know, apparently the intelligence is up there, decided, no, you're not going to do that, and bumped Phobos, the satellite that the Soviets sent up, knocked it out of orbit, and it crashed, apparently.
But they've been doing that to the JPL craft going up and around Mars for
There
years now.
there is an intelligence on Mars that wants to limit our access to their reality. And they've done a damn pretty good job of it.
Well, our witness, Henry Deacon, and I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know him well.
Okay. He has said that the Anunnaki are on Mars in
They
bases.
are. I agree with that.
So are they the ones shooting down those objects, you know, the various
probably.
craft from JPL and so on?
Look, Zechariah has said, and I know this old man, I respect him tremendously.